to resume today's meeting. So good morning and welcome to the Committee of the Whole for the Municipality of Jasper for Tuesday, May 11th, 2021. And today happens to fall on National Nursing Week. So I'd like to take a moment to first acknowledge the nursing staff in our community and throughout the entire country. Both locally and nationally, our nursing staff are tasked with the unimaginable efforts and are working so diligently to keep us moving in a forward direction. Thank you to each of you who do what you do for us. We are grateful for the sacrifice that both you and your families make on behalf of our community, for the energy that you give to us. So thank you very much. And it's 9:31, so I will officially call this meeting to order. Council, you have today's agenda in front of you. Is there any additions to today's agenda? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve today's agenda as presented? Thank you, Councillor Keller-Empey. All in favor? That's carried. Welcome, Councillor Wilson. We have before us the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting from April 27th. Is there any adjustments, corrections to be made to those minutes? Hearing nothing, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 27th Committee of the Whole meeting as presented? Councillor Janot, thank you. All in favor? And that is carried. There are no presentations scheduled for this morning on our agenda. Is that still correct, Mr. Given? Thank you very much. And agenda item number 6, business arising from the minutes. Is there any business arising from April 27th minutes of from the Committee of the Whole meeting? Hearing nothing, we can move to agenda item number 7, director reports, which there are no director reports scheduled for today. Taking us right to policy and governance, agenda item 8.1. Is there any council discussion on our strategic priorities? Great. Agenda item number 9, new business. Starting with 9.1, the community garden expansion request. Mr. Given, you'll lead us through this?
Yes, well, actually, I'm going to turn it over, Deputy Mayor McGrath, to Mr. Greathead, who will present the report. John, I believe you're there, and you can present the report and recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Given, and welcome, Mr. Greathead.
Good morning, Council. We did acknowledge the community garden expansion request, and when we reviewed the request, unfortunately, the expansion to the north and to the east side is it's problematic, and I don't think that we can actually make that happen. We've given clearance to ATCO to begin installing the conductors and their substation or the transformer for the electrical vehicle charging. And so the routing is included in this report of where they're going to be coming in. It's going to be we tried to preserve the trees that are at the, I guess, the west edge of that parking lot. And you'll see where the transformer is going to be located. And you'll see the dotted line to the left of where the transformers are, that there's not much of an offset. So that's as close and as tight as we could make things and give approval with the existing conditions. So unfortunately, it's a little late in the game for us to be able to make this expansion request on the north side. And as well as we understand that there's a request to, or a thought going towards putting in a greenhouse. But I think that we are required to make sure that we take care of the demolition of the AMA building at this point and restore it and site remediation. There's a long way to go before a greenhouse gets installed, namely permitting from parks and approval and that. So that's something that we don't see that being feasible to tie into these two projects. We can work towards that goal with them, but we do need to just restore the site at this point. So that's I guess, where we are with this community garden expansion at this point.
Mr. Given?
Yeah, so just in addition to what Mr. Greathead said, you can see the recommendation in the report, which really is to say administration would be open to considering the greenhouse concept. But as Mr. Greathead said, we would recommend that council do that after the site remediation is done. And then we can really assess what space is there, and council can make some decisions about how they choose to allocate that space. Of course, we will keep the request for the community garden on the books, and we would return to council with some decision making when that site is free and clear, so that you would be able to decide what the highest and best use is. And it would also provide probably more flexibility for the community garden once that's there, rather than an expensive remodeling of a facility that wasn't designed to be a greenhouse. If there was a desire and support from council to move forward with a greenhouse, it could be one that was purpose built.
Any questions from council? Councillor Demota?
Well, I don't know if it's a question, but maybe some contemplation. I remember when the local, I think it was the Food Growers Society, that came to council with some suggestions on different areas, and the current location of where the gardens are right now wasn't the first spot that was on their list, but eventually settled for, I guess, in their list of options. And although some of them weren't ideal, I wonder if there are some other areas in the community where we can expand, or they can maybe visit, or we can revisit with them to look at broadening the scope of this thing, and maybe look at some different areas. Just an idea.
Great suggestion, Councillor Demota. Is there any other comments and questions from councillors? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Through you to either Mr. Given or Mr. Greathead. There are two issues I'd like to ask about. Firstly, the site remediation that you've talked about, the demolition of the old AMA building and reclaiming that site. Is there any possibility that any part of that existing building, even the slab, could be incorporated into a greenhouse if that is the ultimate intent? And I just wonder the extent to which discussions have happened with the community garden group to figure out whether there is any synergy at all with respect to salvaging any part of that building for their needs if they choose to go ahead with a greenhouse. And I say that in the context that my limited understanding is that the greenest of all buildings is the greenest that is already standing. And so if we can make use of any part of that, then it seems to me to be a benefit. So that is my first question, whether those discussions can proceed before we see a complete demolition of that building and remediation of the site.
Sure. Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Mayor Ireland, to your question, at this time, administration hasn't had that detailed conversation about exactly what shape and size of greenhouse the group might be interested in. That's absolutely something we can undertake before we complete remediation of the site, is to have that discussion with them and understand whether that would be useful or not. And we can make that commitment to council. That's not a challenge. I think it's the vertical structure that would be a challenge. The base may be usable.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Mayor Ireland?
Yes, if I may proceed with the second observation I had. I note that in the report that we've received today that is specific to the community garden expansion, we have, I think, fresh information about the electric vehicle charging station. And so I'm just wondering, I think the community will be excited to know, many of our visitors will be excited to know that that provision for electric vehicle charging is to be made apparently this summer. When can we expect more details on that and some sort of formal announcement?
I can
Mr. Given?
I'll pass it over to Mr. Greathead to give a bit of a updated technical answer. And I'll just say in terms of a formal announcement, these are grant-funded programs, and the federal government and the organizations themselves may wish to make something with a little bit more of a splash. But Mr. Greathead can talk about how the technical process of preparing is going.
Mr. Greathead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, we've got at this point the design for the transformers and the conduit and all that has been designed and approved, and permissions granted from the municipality and parks to go ahead with this project. There's some site work that's going to be done on that parking lot. They're going to end up having to install the islands where the chargers are going, and they're going to be moving that back in. The parking lot's going to have to ideally have a one-way traffic flow. So we've included some of that in the designs, make sure that we get the arrows painted into the parking lot. And that my understanding is that they're hoping to break ground in June on this. And aspirationally, I've heard that we're trying to have it ready and open for Canada Day. We'll just have to see if everything follows through for that.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead.
Yes, thank you, indeed. Very exciting news, and I do appreciate that others may want to take the thunder, and well-deserved. But thank you, Mr. Greathead, for the effort that you and your crew have put into this. And it is exciting news that could unfold early in the next few months. So great news. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, for your comments and your great questions. Any other comments and questions from council in relation to the community garden expansion request? Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to throw out the idea, if space for expansion of the community garden is likely to be a difficulty in the space it occupies right now, I think it's evident the community garden has been a resounding success, and it's a great asset to the community. And I would like to see the ability to expand over time. And I know that moving it is nothing to suggest, but as we are working on developing and making available community options, including a bike park in parcel GA, just wondered if it's even worthwhile considering in near or distant future relocating down to that site, and if there might be more space there, and allow a considerably larger and maybe more the potential for a really good spacious permanent site. This is off the top of my head. I know moving it would be a considerable undertaking, but perhaps it's worth a thought, and I just wanted to throw it out there for the moment.
Mr. Given.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Butler. Appreciate the point that you and others are making on that. This is something we could take back at this time. I think we should acknowledge that the group themselves have specifically asked for one specific thing, and the report is intended to say, okay, on that one specific request, here's what's going on, and it can absolutely be the start of a dialogue between the municipality and the community garden group, the local food society. And so we can have that conversation. I think the intent of the report is to say this specific request doesn't really make sense at this time. Worthwhile to have a conversation with them, and we have some space to do that because there's not an opportunity to do something immediately. But yes, absolutely, administration will have that conversation with the group as we proceed with the reclamation of this site and consideration of whether this site or other sites might make more sense.
Councillor Keller-Ampe, then Councillor Journeau.
I think this is a great society, and I'm just wondering for this summer to accommodate them, is there a possibility on the current space they are to widen the fences out so that they could even incorporate another 3 or 4 plots to help with the waiting list? Because there's a green space on either side of the fence, and I wonder if we could bring it out towards the pedestrian walk with it.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Ampe. Go ahead, Mr. Given.
Sure. So, Councillor Keller, MP, that wasn't the request from the group. So, administration didn't examine that option. If council, receives the report and the recommendation here, a follow-up action that we would have would be to return back to the group and say, well, for these reasons, we didn't, council wasn't able to support that specific request. There was some interest in other options. What are you interested in other options? And then if there was a new request, we would bring that to council. But we can absolutely have that kind of discussion dialogue with the group. We would, administration wouldn't see this as, well, council's made a decision and therefore we will not talk to the group anymore. This would actually be council made a decision. We would return to the group, discuss that with them and the reasoning for it, and then see what other options there are to move forward together.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon.
I think I had a computer freeze, but I think I'm back now. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think Councillor Butler's suggestion is a very good one. After we discussed the parcels of GA through GC, I went and walked through the property and had a look. I was concerned primarily about the Discover Trail at the time, and we had just discussed the bike park. And I was considering that the bike park would be smaller. I went for a walk, and there's a lot of land available there. So I think Councillor Butler's suggestion is a good one. It's already its own park, so it's something we can certainly accommodate. I would strongly encourage administration to look at that possibility of relocating. Relocating is not a big item. It's an inconvenience, but can easily be done. A lot of things are relocated at much more expense or work, and it'll still remain a green project in my mind, in spite of the fact that there's some relocation costs. Overall, it's still worthwhile. I think more protection from the wind because of the trees across the way. So I think it's an excellent suggestion and an excellent location. I'd like to see that proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Journeau. Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I just wanted to note that assuming that members of the Community Garden Group might be listening, it is a decision which will unfold over time, and I'm take part in that discussion, but I wouldn't want the group to think that their subsequent requests should be tailored based on this discussion. Although I acknowledge that there is some benefit, perhaps at the west end of town, I would see that more as an additional site rather than a relocated site. It doesn't seem to me to be necessary to have all of the plots in the same place. And we encourage people to walk to the garden or to ride their bikes. So to put it all at the west end as opposed to mostly at the east end, to me does not seem to be a necessary condition. So Mr. Gibbon is right. They haven't asked for anything other than what they did ask for, but if they're going to ask for something else, I would just encourage them to not feel restricted to considering a relocation. We could just add additional sites if that's what we chose to do.
Thank you for that clarification, Mayor Ireland. Councillor Demoda would like to say something.
Yeah, and just to echo a little bit about what the mayor said, I grew up in an area where initiatives like this started 40 years ago and expanded into different areas. So I'm in favor of this. I think it's great for the community. I think it's great for the people involved, and it brings people together. And there's nothing better than helping things grow. So I'm all for it, and I think that we should encourage some expansion on the overall project. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Demoda. I full-heartedly agree, and it sounds like council is in alignment with this agenda item. I'm curious if there's any more questions for administration, or if council might be ready to formulate a motion to receive the report today and to possibly request administration to seek additional space for the community garden, or direct administration to be working with the local food society on options to bring back to council. Would there be a councillor willing to make a motion suggesting all of the comments that have been mentioned in this meeting? Councillor Keller MP.
I agree with what you suggested there, Deputy Mayor. Just like to add, as Mayor Ireland said, that administration take a look at the AMA building and see if a portion of that building that can be maintained to create a greenhouse. It's worth exploring also, I believe, and I'd like to direct administration to do that as part of the motion also.
So that's, sorry, Mr. Gibbon.
Yeah, so council, just in terms of making motions, can we actually do it so that we have a council member say, I move that, and then fill in the blanks with whatever you want to move? It is a bit challenging to make motions by committee, where one council member says, yeah, I'll do that and another thing, just so that we make sure that we're getting it absolutely clear from the minutes, so administration is clear and council is clear on exactly what you're being asked to vote on. And I will say, though, that, as related, administration before removing the AMA building, we will have, as a result of this discussion at council, you can be assured that we will discuss the range of different alternatives with the local food society without needing to specify every single alternative that council might wish to discuss. I mean, really, if council said, hold this request until the summer, kind of as the report recommends, that would be the start of a discussion, and council can be assured that we would say at the council table, council was interested in what other options there were for expansion, additional locations, and what would make sense for you. And when we had that conversation with them, we would bring any specific requests that they might have back. So I want to give council that confidence that we hear what you're saying. And it means that you don't have to be overly specific on each, sort of line item that you might want us to investigate. We'll investigate all the options. And when there is an action to come forward on any one of the specifics that the society is interested in, we would bring that specific back to you for confirmation, of course.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Gibbon, and that gives us lots of clarity. For today's motion, would you prefer to just have this report received by committee of the whole?
I think if committee wanted to make the motion that was there, and for your comfort, append and direct administration return at a future date with additional options. Then that way it's clear that the additional options that were discussed were the ones that we would bring back after having some conversation with the society.
Great, thank you. Councillor Butler had his hand raised.
Well, I was just going to offer to make the motion. I was just going to suggest that instead of the wording suggesting look at opportunities to accommodate the community garden expansion request after the removal of the building, we could just say in conjunction with the removal of the building. That leaves option open and assures the community garden group that we're not going to first remove the building and remediate the site without any consideration to their needs. So if that's acceptable to council, I would make that motion. That council received this report for information and direct administration to look at opportunities to accommodate the community garden expansion requests in conjunction with removal of the building and remediation of the AMA site.
Thank you very much for your motion, Councillor Butler. Any questions on the motion? Any debate on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. Thank you very much.
I wonder if that constitutes an alliance. Just saying. Thank you.
Agenda item number 9.2, reducing utility costs in municipal facilities. Mr. Gibbon.
Yes, thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. So on April 13th, Committee of the Whole directed administration to bring forward recommendations to reduce utility costs in municipal facilities. After that direction from Council, administration considered the types of projects that might be opportunities to do this, and really recognize that there are a variety of technologies and a variety of opportunities that exist, and assessing them was a bit of a challenge for us. So we sort of went back to the start and said, what is another way to look at this? And Utility costs are a significant source of overhead for the municipality. Annually, we expend approximately just under $1 million a year in utility expenses between natural gas and electricity for municipal facilities. And just like any household or business, these underlying utility costs are a source of significant overhead, as I said. The difference is, of course, that overhead cost is passed on to property taxpayers. And as you've seen in your own home or business, utility costs are not decreasing, they are in fact increasing. And so that means that the base cost for the municipality are increasing and the taxes ultimately will increase. And so getting a handle on this cycle is something that is of interest to many municipalities. And that is, I think, why the Municipal Climate Change Action Center, or the MCCAC, which is supported by a grant from the provincial government and organized by AUMA and RMA, has developed the Municipal Energy Manager Program. That program helps municipalities like Jasper by providing a grant that covers up to 80% of the cost of a municipal energy manager's salary. And we can speak a little bit about what a municipal energy manager is, but essentially it fills the gap in municipal knowledge. Within our staff at Jasper, we don't have the specialized knowledge or detailed insight into energy management practices. Certainly our asset management team are thoughtful about this on a regular basis, but they have a pretty wide portfolio of items that they need to address. We don't have this specialized in-house knowledge. And we also have relatively limited capacity to do the detailed analysis that should go along with moving forward on energy programming. The Municipal Energy Manager Program provides that 80% cost of the salary. And I will just direct council, I will pull a few items from the guidebook, which was attached to the council report. The program highlights really are that the energy manager is required in the first year to develop an energy management plan covering 3 or more years for all in-scope municipal facilities. They're required to conduct an internal assessment of energy performance of all municipal buildings via benchmarking tools. Then they go through and assign reduction targets utilizing tools offered through the Partners for Climate Protection Program administered by FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They identify, prioritize, and implement a schedule of specific opportunities to realize measurable and meaningful improvements in energy efficiency. And then they also go through and list the most appropriate opportunities for incentive funding that might be available. So that's the kind of work that this position can enable. And the reason that administration is bringing this forward is because it is our belief that this is the prerequisite to any other types of energy programs. There are many, many different technologies available today, such as solar installation, conversion to electric vehicle fleets, combined heat and power, CHP units, and other options. And there are grants for all of them. And any of them are interesting and would be useful, but we really should be ensuring that we're making logical decisions that are well planned out and thoughtful so that we can have the greatest impact at the lowest cost. The Municipal Energy Manager position would enable us to do that logical, thoughtful process that would allow us ultimately to reduce energy costs and reduce the ongoing burden for taxpayers. And so that's why administration is recommending that we pursue this as a response to council's direction to identify opportunities to reduce utility costs. I have had an initial conversation with the town of Hinton. There is an opportunity to share the municipal energy manager position. And so what we're proposing is a shared position between Hinton and Jasper, where the 2 municipalities would be responsible for sharing the remaining 20% of the cost. So the remaining 20% of the cost of the position would be split between the 2 of us, essentially meaning that either one would only have to handle the 10% of the cost. This is happening in about 5 to 6 municipalities across the province already. The town of Hinton is interested. And the additional benefit of the partnership would be to allow, in terms of recruitment, given that it would be a term position, we'd be able to offer the opportunity potentially to live in Hinton and work in Jasper. As council knows, it can be difficult to attract term positions for very specialized types of workers into Jasper, given the housing situation. So we see an additional benefit to the partnership there. So I will just reiterate that administration is recommending the council approve the submission of an application to the Municipal Energy Manager Program in collaboration with the town of Hinton, and with any financial impacts outside the currently approved 2021 budget envelope to be approved through the 2022 budget process. And just to speak to that last point, given the relatively low cost of the program, it's my belief that we can likely manage it within the existing approved budget envelope, given that it's really only that 10% share of the overall cost of the implementation. Of course, any recommendations from the manager for additional programs would be things that council would see through the regular cycle of committee, council, and budgeting. But administration believes that this is the most logical and thoughtful process to be able to ultimately lead to a reduction in municipal energy costs within our facilities. I'll leave it there for any questions that council might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Questions for administration? Councillor Butler.
Sorry, thank you very much. Mr. Given, thank you very much to you and your team for the suggestion. I think it's an excellent one. I just wanted to clarify if my understanding is correct, that the program is anticipated to fund 80% of a position. I guess what I'm looking for is just what is the thinking behind sharing that position? You did mention the point about living accommodation. I understand that. Is it you're thinking that we're more likely to succeed in an application if it was done in conjunction with another community as opposed to proceeding on our own?
Well, I think it's, thanks, Councillor Butler, through Deputy Mayor McGrath. It's really threefold. I think it makes our application more attractive. I think it improves our ability to recruit. And frankly, I think that it reduces the overall cost to the municipality, while still keeping a manageable amount of work. In discussion with the CAO at Hinton, thinking about our combined facilities, we don't believe that it would stretch the energy manager one position to serve both communities in terms of the volume of work that there would be. In a larger community, in a city, of 50,000 with one energy manager would likely have the same portfolio of facilities that Hinton and Jasper would have combined. And so there's essentially those three benefits: the better potential for the application approval, the increased ability to recruit, and then finally, of course, the reduced direct cost to Jasper.
Go ahead, Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor and Mr. Given. It's a great suggestion. It's rare enough that our community has the opportunity for intermunicipal agreements, that sort of thing. Many other communities are working with nearby and adjoining communities all the time for anything from waste management to water management. And it's not often that we see those opportunities. So I think it's really creative of administration to take this approach. And I'm certainly in favor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Mayor Ireland, then Councillor Demota.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Through you to Mr. Given, I reiterate the thanks of Councillor Butler for the report. I wonder, in terms of partnering, whether we might even consider going more regional. I note that the application process does not apply to communities over 150,000, but we could fit all of the West Yellowhead into that. So I really wonder whether there is a need for, say, the 10,000 residents of Hinton and the 5,000 in Jasper for this full position. Could we include potentially Edson and Yellowhead County as part of this? I have more questions, but I see Mr. Given wants to respond to that, so I'm happy to wait.
Mr. Given?
Yes, thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Mayor Ireland, to your question, I would not look at it so much in terms of the number of residents. I appreciate the population is one thing, but really it's the portfolio of facilities. And so for Jasper's part, obviously we have the activity center, the fitness aquatic center, the protective services building, the library. And so, we have a portfolio of about 5 or 6 facilities. And council will remember that the activity center has some significant renovations in consideration. And so, there's some significant complexity to that portfolio that we have here in Jasper. When combined with a similar, maybe slightly larger portfolio of facilities in Hinton, all of a sudden you start to come to 10 or 12 municipal facilities that each need to have a detailed assessment. So really it is more about the number of facilities. I'm not sure that we'd be able to make a case that that one energy manager could do that level of detailed work on, all of a sudden 12 or 20 facilities, or sorry, on 15 or 20 facilities in the course of their 1-year term.
Thank you for that, and that leads me then quite easily into the next issue, which is that, and I thank you for finding this opportunity, and obviously it's an opportunity, and you take what you get. But as I read the details of the document that was provided in the agenda, although in most cases it was a 2-year opportunity for municipalities who applied, because we are now beyond April 30th, 2021, it would be a 1 year. But as I read it, one of the huge benefits, I think, of the program is that the person hired, who has to have professional designation, still gets coaching at a national level. But it appears to me that the coaching, the technical advisory coaching, is not available for those who have signed after the conclusion of the first year. And it just surprises me that the coaching seems to me to be the critical element. Obviously, people have looked at this across the nation and have a sense of how municipalities can better their outcomes. But then we seem to be, by virtue of the nature of the application, denied that very real benefit. So I'm simply saying I think it's an idea worth investigating, but there seem to me to be some shortcomings in the program itself, including simple things like they will not cover any share of benefits. They promote regional affiliations, but won't cover travel costs. So it seems to me that there are little hiccups that will add to the cost. And fair enough, it might still be worth proceeding. But I have some hesitation to say, jump in with both feet before testing the water a little bit more.
Councillor Demota?
Yeah, I concur with what the mayor has stated. And, and this reminded me of a study that was done in Ontario through one of the universities there. And it was to conduct a review of different municipalities that showed efficiencies or the strive to be efficient. And it was a shared study, and basically culminated into what certain municipalities did to make themselves more efficient. And there was a municipality that had a challenge within their own departments to look at some initiatives like this. So it challenged some of the staff and directors to look at what they could be doing differently. And although they didn't have the expertise, there is stuff out there, and even maybe hiring a consultant at times that could help us, where we could be a little bit more efficient internally. And I think that, getting incentives to provide for something like that could be beneficial, because as far as the long-term, sustainability of this position, to me, the proof would have to be in the pudding. I know right now with, some proposed monies from the province, to support this is short term, but what are the long term? What's the long term vision of this, and could it be sustainable? Right now, it might be beneficial from a tax point of view for some relief, but down the road, is it going to be a bigger burden to the community? Because when I look at step 2 of the application, I think it's page 9 of the MEM document, and I think it's 19 on the agenda package. It makes a reference to staff levels there. And, I think that, down the road, this could prove to be a bigger burden than that's actually there just because the money's there. So just some things to look at.
Mr. Given.
Sure. Yeah, just for council's confidence, to be very clear, administration is only proposing that this be a term position, that it would be 1 year at a time, and that any continuation of the program would require council approval. So there's no intent that we'd be getting position and then that it would continue over time. There is actually a bit of a question of whether the year 2 funding will be available. This is a grant funded program. It would be up to there still being available grants left in the program after year 1. And so we'd have to assess that. Councillor Demoda mentioned getting a consultant in from time to time, and council knows the cost of a consultant or consultants generally. And when I look at the year 1 deliverables, that at the end of the first year, the municipality of Jasper would have an energy management plan covering 3 years. The municipality of Jasper would have an internal assessment of energy performance and associated greenhouse gas emissions of all municipal buildings. Jasper would have recommendations for prioritization and implementation of specific opportunities to realize measurable and meaningful improvements in energy efficiency as recommended to building managers. We would have a list of the most appropriate opportunities for pursuing funding. We would have a complete energy audit of the highest energy consuming municipal building. And we would have greenhouse gas emission reducing activities that achieve a 5% reduction. So, for what is at the high end, and I will estimate on the high end, to ensure that we can come, I'd rather under promise and over deliver. But at the high end, for a $30,000 investment, at the end of year 1, we have all of those things. I think we would be challenged to hire a consultant that would deliver those things for $30,000.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
I just want to say well stated, and yeah, that provides really good information. So thanks for that feedback.
Councillor Keller-MP.
I think this is a great opportunity, and I think it's a great regional partnership with Hinton. And I think for $30,000 to have all these plans in place, and when our environmental committee is back and they can also have these plans going forward to work on, and I think it's a step forward. It's worth it for $30,000 to try.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-MP. Is there any other comments or questions for administration? I absolutely agree with your statements, Councillor Keller-MP. This is a strategic approach and a strategic process to look into things and consider things like the solar grants that are out there and the electric vehicle grants, the fleet grants that are out there. There was an email already floating around our inboxes this morning from a councillor expressing the importance of electric vehicles in our fleets. And this is a very strategic process to go through in order to come to a place where we do have a possibility of having a 3-year plan to manage our energy and our utilities in Jasper more efficiently. I think it's absolutely worth a shot of applying. Is there a councillor prepared to make a motion? The motion in our agenda reads that committee recommend council approve the submission of an application to the Municipal Energy Manager Program in collaboration with the town of Hinton with financial impacts outside the currently approved 2021 budget envelope to be approved through the 2022 budget process. Councillor Butler.
I'll defer to Councillor Keller-Rampy. Thanks.
Councillor Keller-Rampy.
I was going to make the motion that we take the recommendation of administration to approve the submission of an application to the Municipal Energy Manager Program in collaboration with the Town of Hinton, with financial impacts outside the current approved 2021 budget envelope to be approved through the 2022 budget process.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Rampy. Is there any debate, questions on the motion? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath, through you to administration. I'd just like clarity on the last phrase of the motion, that is, with financial impacts outside the currently approved 2021 budget envelope to be approved through the 2022 budget process. Are there any financial impacts inside the current 2021 budget, or are all financial impacts outside the current budget? And what have we necessarily then required of an incoming council in terms of the budgetary process? I just like some clarity on where we stand financially and what obligation we might have placed on an incoming council.
Mr. Given.
Sure. Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. For Mayor Ireland. Mayor Ireland, the additional items might be related to recommendations for capital improvements or changes to facilities. The recommendations could include continuation of the program if it becomes clear by the fall of this year that administration would recommend doing a second year, or if there was even second year funding available, and we were able to know that at that time, that would be something that we would bring forward. The essence of the recommendation here is that the small portion that would be split between Jasper and Hinton is something that administration believes we can handle within the currently approved 2021 budget envelope. This was intended to give council the confidence that if there was anything that would impact future years, of course, that would be subject to the budget discussions and presented for council decision making at that time. It was intended to acknowledge that council's approval of participation in this program at this level doesn't mean that you're immediately funding all recommendations that may arise from the position. Or that you've committed to installing a solar farm or electrifying the vehicle fleet in 2022. Just a recognition that any substantive decision making that would have financial impact would be presented through the regular course of business.
Thank you for that clarity, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. I was going to pose a similar question, so thank you, Mayor Ireland, for that. And I know it is absolutely not the intent to, in any way, for this council to position the next council, but I'd like to suggest that we simply change the word from to be approved to be considered. The motion, and I know nobody meant this, but the motion appears to anticipate some future, that it could anticipate some level of approval by a future council, and it's not what we mean to do. So let's just say considered.
It looks like there is agreement on that amendment to change the word in the motion from approved to consider. Is there any further questions before I call the question? Great. Should I'm going to restate the motion just so administration has the wording. That committee recommend council approve the submission of an application to the Municipal Energy Manager Program in collaboration with the Town of Hinton with financial impacts outside the currently approved 2021 budget envelope to be considered through the 2022 budget processes. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Given and your team for preparing the report. Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a point of order. I see that Councillor Wilson is still signed in, but we can't see him. And so with a visual show of hands, I don't know how staff is expected to record his vote. It's a minor matter really, because it won't change the vote, but there is an obligation on staff to record it, and I don't think it's been recorded.
Mayor Ireland, and I would defer to Ms. Nadan and Ms. Byrne, but I think there are times where council members have to leave the table. Your screen may still be on, but we may not see or hear you. I think we would just assume that Councillor Wilson is away until he logs on to either verbally say something or to vote. We would just assume that he's away from the council table. And until he actually shows himself as he just has, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, my apologies. Sorry, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my apologies. I'm sorry I didn't zoom back in for both votes. I'm not opposed to either, but again, I will have to call in. So, like Mr. Gibbons said, I guess I should be considered. I'm away from the table. I'm leaving Wi-Fi now, so I'll just have to call in at this point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for clarifying, Councillor Wilson. Unless we see your face, your vote will not be recorded. Thank you. We can move on to agenda item number 9.3, and just for everyone's comfort, I'll call a recess after 9.3. The COVID Relief Restricted Reserve Scope Inquiry. Mr. Gibbon.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Well, I suppose that when we get to the break, depends on council's how council takes the discussion here. I will do a very brief introduction and to remind council that during the 2021 budget discussions, you created a $775,000 COVID relief reserve, which was intended to provide council the opportunity to make some decisions about what types of reliefs you may wish to provide and when you may wish to provide them. So that exists. This report is essentially an early report to request additional direction on the scope here. We don't need to get into specific program details necessarily, but administration is trying to narrow the field of options that council wishes to consider. And so that's the overall intent of this report. Additionally, you'll see in the report that after our close of the year end, which council received the report from our auditors last week, administration has identified that there is essentially what we could call surplus of $396,712 that council could choose to allocate to the COVID relief reserve, again, to enable whatever future decision-making council wishes to do on that. Administration doesn't take a position on how it should be utilized, but there is essentially that surplus from the 2020 year that administration is recommending the COVID relief reserve may be an appropriate place to hold that until council makes some decisions about what they wish to do. And again, recognizing that may be carried over to future years, or it might be utilized in the 2021 year. But essentially, that's the intent of the report. You can see that an acknowledgement that, of course, the economic impacts of the pandemic have been unevenly distributed, both across businesses and across individuals and households. Most local governments at the early stage of the pandemic have provided some kind of initial relief through property tax freezes, or reducing taxes or deferring payment deadlines, which of course Jasper did many of those things in 2020. But beyond that broad-based relief, some local governments have chosen to institute other supports. And those other supports can, and this is my definition, but I would generally define them as either direct or indirect supports. Direct financial supports could take the form of cash grants, utility credits, or waiver of business licensing fees. Examples of those, and these are just some that were actually taken from the AUMA's website, where they do have a listing of some programs that municipalities have put in place. But examples of these direct financial supports include the town of Fairview, which is offering a cash grant of up to $5,000 for businesses. The town of Didsbury, which has been waiving business license fees and development permit fees. And my understanding is, and we were just sent one today, that Councillor Keller, her MP, might be able to reference a little bit more, but the town of Hinton is also providing some grants in collaboration with Community Futures. I'd classify those generally as direct financial supports. There are also examples of indirect financial supports where essentially the municipality is providing a financial grant in order to do a specific type of work that the municipality has defined. Examples of this include the cities of Leduc and Wetaskiwin, who are offering up to $600 to assist businesses who need a qualified accountant to assist in the application for provincial or federal programs. Another community is offering a marketing grant to businesses of up to $2,500 to help them launch online marketing or to increase their marketing capacity to drive cash flow to their business. Other communities are offering grants for businesses to make physical improvements like patios, which would obviously be relevant here, or physical improvements, other types of physical improvements to their business. Those would be examples of indirect supports, because the municipality is not just saying, here's some cash, have a good day. They're saying, here's some cash and you must do this specific kind of purpose. So that can be beneficial, but obviously has a little bit of a different flavor. The report is intended to ask for council's direction on what alternatives should administration pursue when we come forward to you with recommendations for a program. Should we pursue A, COVID relief programs to provide financial supports, direct financial supports to businesses? Should we have B, indirect financial supports to businesses? C, direct financial supports to households or individuals? Or D, indirect financial supports to households or individuals? And so it really is council interested in programs that benefit businesses or households and individuals? Or both? So businesses or individuals is an easy way to think about it. And then, is council interested in programs that are providing some kind of direct financial support, which is essentially cash, that you have to meet some criteria to qualify for, but then after you qualify under that criteria that you're allowed to, that you just receive that grant? Or are you looking for indirect financial supports that are aligned around other priorities of council, like green incentives, patios, accessibility improvements, marketing grants? And so really, before administration wanted to go too far down the path of designing a program in detail, we wanted to receive some scope direction from you on which of these alternatives we should be pursuing, so we don't go too far down the track and risk being out of alignment with council's wishes. I'll leave it there for discussion from council and any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Councillor Demota.
Thank you very much for this. Just to provide a little bit more clarity. So when the most funding was applied to the 2020 budget, we already saw 1.775 million come out of that as a surplus. And this is additional to that 1.7. So it's more like once most was applied, we have 2.1 million that came as a surplus. Okay, so having said that, I feel like we're almost getting, like, because it was most funding and now it's considered a surplus because it was monies that have been left over from the 2020 budget. Does that mean that this money is required to be used a certain way because it used to be most funding? Okay, so then it's no offense to you, but now I feel like we're in a little bit of a position now that if we decide just to put that towards reserves and not do anything with it, that people might get mad at us for not doing anything with it. So now it's just like we have all these opportunities to do things and we already have some money there. But I am interested in trying to find some relief for the community in some areas. So there are some options there, and I think definitely worth considering for council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Keller-MP.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Through you to Mr. Given. Can you explain the incorporated 175,000 within the budget to offset foreseeable uncertainties within childcare and fitness and aquatic? I don't remember seeing that when we did the $1 million and the 775. Can you give us some clarification on that?
Yeah, that was built into the, Deputy Mayor McGrath for Councillor Keller-MP, that was built into the base budget. I believe we did reference it during the budget presentations. And so it was the money that was built in for the things that we knew were going to happen. I think we had this discussion at the council table about the things we can already tell that we're not going to have the same kind of culture and rec revenue that we have had in previous years, like 2019. We know that. We know that there will be there are limitations on the number of children in the child care center, and so administration saw those as well. Those were foreseeable to administration. The discussion that we had about the reserve was, what about the things that we can't know right now? And so you may remember that discussion. So the 175,000 was built into the base budget, and that was built into each of those two service areas, was divided across those two service areas, and incorporated in the base budget assumptions for the departments that was presented to council.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Yes, you may.
Deputy Mayor McGrath. I'm just curious. So the $24,000 that we put into the other reserve for childcare, this wasn't part of that, or
no,
wasn't anticipated at that time being part of that?
No, it was not.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Given. Oh, can I have one more question, please? In the 396,000, last year, council gave an extra 100,000 to childcare that in November we told didn't get spent, but then in March it did get spent. I'm wondering, would that be part of that 396,000?
I have to apologize, Councillor Keller-MP. I can't answer that question, and Ms. Malinchuk is off today. So I apologize that I can't answer that at the table. But you know, I appreciate that the 2020 year was complicated. As I know, every business is trying to figure out how they do their taxes with federal programs and everything else, and we're in a bit of the same position. And just to clarify again for council around most, so the most programs funding requirements were that it had to be expended by March 31st, 2021. Ms. Malinchuk has ensured that we met that program requirement and that all of the most funding has been expended as of March 31st, 2021. When we ended the year, after closing off the books, we found that there was a surplus of that 396,000. And so it is a bit like splitting hairs. I am very, very reluctant to say that this is most money that hasn't yet been spent, because the program says any most money that hasn't been spent by March 31st needs to be returned and administration has taken all required steps to ensure that most dollars that were granted to Jasper have been accounted for and expended prior to the deadline. So we ended the year, we have a surplus. Now council gets to decide what to do with the surplus.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-MP. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. Following up on a question that Councillor Keller-MP asked, I want to make sure I understand the quantity of the COVID relief reserve. So if I understand, Mr. Given, if council accepts the first bulleted recommendation to allocate the additional nearly $400,000 to the COVID relief reserve, and council allocated $24,000 already, am I correct then that we would be looking at a COVID relief reserve of about $1.195 million. So where we see there's $775,000 in the reserve, we would add the 396,712 to that number. Additionally, I'm assuming that what isn't mentioned here because I didn't need to, but that the $24,000 for childcare relief would also be added into that. And
Mr.
do I-
Given.
Yeah, so at budget, council made a number of changes to remove monies from the departmental budget and to assign them to reserves. That was the motion. It was not specific to the COVID relief reserve. With respect to the $24,000 for childcare, had been removed from the program budget and is in the overall administration reserve. Available for council decision making. I know that there was a discussion about sort of what kind of childcare subsidy programs might be possible. And if that's required, administration would come back to council for some decision making on that. Council, so the most direct answer, Councillor Butler, is no, the $24,000 have been removed from the program budget and placed into the overall administrative reserve and not into the COVID relief reserve. In this report, the final line in terms of financial implications spells out, specifically that it is $1.171712 that would be in the COVID relief reserve if council approves the recommendation in the report. So I hope that provides the additional clarity, Councillor Butler, that you're looking for. The $24,000 was not assigned to the COVID relief reserve.
Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much for that. Well, it is, yeah, this issue is at the substance of my question. In fact, the one motion with respect to the $24,000, in fact, I think we'll find if we look at the minutes of the meeting, did in fact assign that $24,000 to the COVID relief reserve for that specific purpose. The other allocations, it's true, the motions did not specify where, to which reserves those amounts would be assigned. I think that was deliberate, but the $24,000 for deferring childcare costs was in fact meant to be assigned to the COVID relief reserve.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Do we have any conversation and debate on the alternatives that have been suggested by administration on page 27 of 84 of our agenda package to define the scope that council is interested in pursuing? Councillor Demota, I missed your hand up, and then Mayor Ireland.
Well, I just, with some of the suggestions that were presented, this is much like the idea of providing some assistance in the childcare thing out of the COVID thing. So I don't have a specific motion in mind right now. There are a lot of things to consider, and it's kind of new information for us that we received over the weekend, and I'd like a little bit more time to consider it. So I think putting it towards the COVID relief fund in some fashion or some type of reserve, I think is the right thing to do, maybe the only thing to do at this point, and then have a little bit more discussion on the topic on where we could allocate these appropriately.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I will say I was a little surprised that I didn't see as option E all of the above, because that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I appreciate that this is a work in progress. We allocated $1 million through our budget discussions as tax relief. So that applies to taxpayers, some of whom will be businesses, some of whom will be individuals, but it applies to taxpayers directly. Some who pay a share of taxes through rent will see some indirect benefit, but really that was a program directed at taxpayers. And I think my understanding when we set up the the COVID relief reserve was to look at need more generally and not just from the perspective of a taxpayer. And so I would not like at this point the scope of the investigation to be limited. If there are opportunities to provide needed relief to businesses, whether direct or indirect, and particularly because the definition of direct and indirect is a bit hazy in any event. So if direct support might include a credit or the waiving of a business-related fee, for example, I think we should absolutely look at the potential for relief based on direct support, if that's what it means. Indirect support, I agree, we should be looking at that. I think it's challenging, perhaps, to understand how this might apply to households or individuals. Households, to the extent they're taxpayers, have seen some relief in the $1 million package. But it's possible that an individual might need relief because of reductions in capacity at the daycare. Perhaps somebody has been disadvantaged and maybe they can demonstrate that, and maybe there is an opportunity to provide some relief. So my initial view, because this is just a work in progress and because it's only developing programs that can come back for consideration by council, I am inclined, despite the workload that it may put on administration, to direct them to investigate all the opportunities and bring those back to council. There's not a big rush to do this, but we've set aside the relief fund, and maybe at the end of the day, we'll decide that the most equitable thing to do is to use it again next year as tax relief, as we did with the $1 million this year. But let's look at our options and let's look at all of them. So my view is yes to A, B, C, and D.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Councillor Keller-Empey, then Councillor Butler.
Thank you for that, Mayor Ireland. And I do agree. I like the idea of looking across the board, and we have some high utilities, and that can also impact all of our community. Mr. Given.
Just waiting to be recognized by the chair to get in the queue. Sorry, Councillor Keller-Empey, for breaking your train of thought.
That's okay. I am really curious about what the COVID relief committee that we formed. I'm interested in their recommendations also of what they see coming back, because they've been working on this for a year now, and I'd like to see some of their recommendations also. Also think, my passion in the past, marketing, I think, this will be a great opportunity maybe to work with Tourism Jasper and the businesses down the road that for recovery and marketing for Jasper. That will benefit everybody in Jasper if our economy comes back. So I think there's a lot of things to be considered, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do across the board to benefit both businesses and our residents.
Mr. Given.
Thanks. I think I'm jumping the queue on Councillor Butler, but I did just want to respond actually to his point about the minutes and the reflection of the $24,000. Checking the minutes, it's correct. That was captured in the minutes. Thank you, Councillor Butler, Councillor Keller-Empey. And so that was missed in this report. That would have been processed appropriately on the back end. And so we'll confirm that that's happened. So I think you can comfortably just add that number here, but it was captured correctly from the motion during the budget discussion. I just wanted to report that back.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, Mr. Given. I wasn't worried about it because I knew this would sort itself out. I just wanted to bring it up for clarity. Building on what we heard from Mayor Ireland, I agree broadly. I would like to see us retain open minds with respect to how the COVID relief reserve could be used. That being said, I think we have thus far been very active in providing relief. Certainly in the first year, we did so with a $1 million tax reduction. We are doing so this year with $1 million tax. I'm not really sure what the word is. It's another way of reducing taxes. by applying $1 million against what would otherwise be the tax requisition. And then there's relief that we have offered that does not have numbers attached to it necessarily. So we have managed so far, as I understand it, for example, to maintain operations in our community facilities without raising the user fees by using some of the most funding. And, you know, I think that's an example where people have to recognize, or should recognize, that there is assistance there where we see a considerably higher net operating deficit for some of our facilities that we are absorbing because it's the right thing to do right now. And then another area that I think of is where we have offered a lot of assistance with respect to outdoor seating for restaurants, where we are not charging what I think we all recognize would have to look like a considerably higher fee for some of those facilities, particularly when we talk about implementing paid parking. So these are ways in which we have, within our realm of a service provider and charging user fees, have already gone down a road of providing relief. And I'm very much in favor of continuing in that vein. And so what I'm saying with that is I'm in favor of using this fund to defer or lower or alleviate municipal fees that we charge and taxes. So we charge utilities, and there are businesses that are really struggling with that because they're closed or operating at a much lower level of business. And that is an area where I think we could use this fund to deflect some of those fees. Another area would be, well, it's a utility garbage fees, for example, where businesses are faithfully paying their fees while in some cases those businesses have been completely closed or operating, placing considerably lower demand. But our utilities billing system doesn't give administration the flexibility to simply lower those fees. So I think we should do that. Daycare is another example where we collect daycare fees where that represents a hardship. We've already stated our willingness to look at mitigating some of those fees. So I'm in favor of all of those sorts of efforts with this fund. I struggle quite a lot to think about implementing grant programs where we actually, give money to deserving individuals. It's not, but I know there are lots of deserving individuals and businesses, but I see that as just being a very difficult and fraught kind of undertaking to get into. And I also recognize that those are areas that higher levels of government are deeply involved in. So rent replacement, salary replacement, these kind of programs are, in my view, the purview of provincial and federal governments. And we should think about where staying within our realm as municipal government. So those are the thoughts I have on where we can go. I think helping with municipal fees and user fees and taxes is within our realm. I will struggle with direct granting kind of programs.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. I'll take a moment to add to the discussion on my own beliefs and values with the alternatives that have been discussed and brought forward by administration. I agree with Mayor Ireland that the broadness of the scope A, B, C, and D is of interest to me. I believe that the statements made by administration that the disproportionate effects of COVID have been really dramatically felt by our community members. There are community members that are renters that have not seen any relief thus far from the municipality of Jasper. And I would love to see individuals and households directly impacted by this possibility of grants or dollars being provided to those individuals or households. I also believe that, putting a large chunk of money into the childcare budget would alleviate expenses to all of the families that are registered within the Wildflowers Childcare Center that is a municipal run program, as well as out of school care. There's going to be families that absolutely need their children in out of school care for, well, these days that are currently experiencing really hardships for families that are working families, and they had 2 days of notice to have their children under supervision, as well as for the entire summer months. These workers in our community need to be at work, and they need to be providing the valuable service that they do, and they can't do that without childcare or affordable and safe childcare for their children. I also agree with the points being made about the economic task force and the suggestions that might come forward from them. I would love to see some of these dollars go towards revitalization of our downtown core. Pedestrianization of Patricia Street would be an excellent use of these dollars, specifically related to the COVID relief. And I am also in favor of grants, programs that could be available through the municipality of Jasper on top of what has already been done provincially and federally. We have friends and community members and neighbors that they've taken everything that's been available to them, and it's still really hard to operate and keep their doors open. So I would be in favor of seeing as much social supports available to the residents of Jasper as possible with this $1.1 million. And Councillor Demota.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm just wondering, thank you, Deputy Mayor, through you to Mr. Given. Because all of these surpluses came in, or this surplus came in through our operational budget, we often use operational money to go in some way to capital projects. And I'm wondering, does what happened through the most funding being applied to last year's budget and having this come out in this fashion restrict us from using this money for capital expenditures?
Deputy Mayor McGrath.
Sorry, Mr. Given.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor McGrath for Councillor Demota. No, we are not restricted. If Council decided that an appropriate strategy for COVID relief and recovery was to invest in a certain kind of infrastructure in order that taxpayers would receive the benefit of that infrastructure without having to face the full costs of the investment, that would be completely within scope and possible. And I'll just say a couple of things in response to the discussion. Appreciate the willingness to consider a fairly broad range of options, and I'm comfortable presenting some things to Council based on our discussion today. I think the intent here was to see if there was anything first off that was off limits. And I understand that there, is a little bit of a hesitancy around simple cash grants to individuals just to do, what they wish to do. So that's been received. I am comfortable in developing some recommended programs for Council's consideration, and really in the spirit of keeping all the options on the table. I'm not here, other than that one proviso about saying that, there's a hesitancy to intrude where the provincial and federal governments are already active, and sort of stepping onto their toes. That other than that, there's a willingness to consider a pretty broad range of options. I have no concerns about presenting something to Council, and we will refine and revise it together. That's totally fine. The one thing that I guess in terms of the recommendations today would be the allocation of that 396,000. We should get that on the book so that process is done and it's allocated to this. And I am comfortable in taking Council's direction to return with draft COVID relief programs. And I will also say that in terms of the task force, they will be receiving their final draft recommendations and reviewing them next week. after which they would be in a position to present those to council. And already having worked with them, I'm aware of some of the context of those. And so we would certainly ensure that that's captured at an early stage and in any draft recommendations that would come. The relief programs likely wouldn't come until after council has viewed the recommendations from the task force. And so council can be assured of that as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Thank you, Councillor Demota. You
If I
may
may follow
continue.
up. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I giggled was because that's almost verbatim what I was thinking. What's off limits here? So in the nature of that, I was going to propose a motion to defer that. So the alternative suggestion there, E, defer decision making on the 2021 utilization of the COVID relief reserve until a later date. So, but I guess this money would have to be applied there first before that was deferred anyway. So I want a motion defer making a decision on this right now.
Well, Deputy Mayor McGrath, if I may, Councillor Demota, I think actually there's a way to be more active from my perspective. Deferral means lay down the tools, don't do any further work. We'll come back at this at a later time. I think what I understood from council was a general willingness for administration to do some work and come back with some alternatives for council's consideration. So I don't think and so just to be clear, the E is we're not ready to make any decision, don't do any further work, administration, and we'll talk about this later. I don't think I hear anybody on council, including yourself, Councillor Demota, saying that you want us to stop thinking about this. You're saying we're not ready to decide because we don't have enough information, and I would agree with that. If council wishes us to do some work on this, then give us the direction to return back with draft COVID relief programs. And we'll come back to you and we will see if we're able to hit the mark. And again, together through the process, we would refine those programs to council's liking. The deferral is stop doing any work. Don't think about this until later on.
Yeah, yes and no. And, you know, I think it's just, I think that we might be positioning ourselves, and that's the only reason that I'm a little apprehensive about this. And it's not exactly what you said. No, let's not make any decisions about this. But I'm still apprehensive on moving forward with having any motions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Any further questions? Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. I suggest we dispose of the first recommendation here today. We may want to have some more discussion around the use of the money, but I think I detect consensus on the first bullet. So I will move the committee recommend council approve allocating an additional $396,712 to the COVID relief reserve.
Thank you very much for the motion, Councillor Butler. Any questions or debate from council? Councillor Butler.
I'm just going to take this opportunity to mention one thing. We're about to add $400,000 to the $775,000 that we already had, creating, as we've discussed, a COVID relief reserve in the realm of $1.1 million. And there has been already a lot of talk around this table, exactly as there should be. I didn't mean that to sound critical about ideas for utilizing it. What I do want to say is that sounds like a pretty big number, and it absolutely isn't. We spend in a year to operate this community. I was actually trying to quickly go back to our financial statements, but we spend $18 or $20 million a year running this community from various sources. I don't want to create a sense in the community that there is a lot of money here. It's a good amount, and we should steward it with great care and attention. I am still concerned about when the other shoe drops on the tax requisition in 2022, and would like to make sure that we are in a position to even out the absolutely necessary increases in tax requisition in coming years. It's got to be done. Those taxes need to be charged. I think administration has made a really good case that our taxation level in Jasper is probably not sustainable into the future, as in it's not high enough to support our infrastructure. So I just wanted to make the point that this is not a really huge amount of money, and we need to take care and attention with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. Councillor Demota.
I appreciate the motion and those comments. And I just wanted to say that, you know, barring any limitations to this money and considering what Councillor Butler just said, there might be an opportunity that, you know, even though it's not that large amount, that we could seed it towards something that would provide some sort of benefit in the future, a continuing benefit for the community. So, you know, we can see continual relief or, you know, opportunities for other initiatives going down the road where it perpetually takes care of itself. There might be an opportunity there. So I'm interested in considering those, or at least finding them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Any other comments or debate on the motion? Hearing none, I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. Thank you very much for the motion and for the respectful debate. Being that we haven't completed this request for decision on today's agenda, is there any councillor prepared to discuss the second point or perhaps draw up a motion? Mayor Ireland?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Yes, I'm prepared at this time to make a motion that Committee of the Whole direct administration to develop draft COVID relief programs aligned with committee's preference for all presented options and present the draft at a future Committee of the Whole meeting.
Thank you very much.
And if I could speak briefly to the motion, I think decision is necessarily deferred, but we cannot get to decision ever without information, and this provides that necessary information. So the intent of the motion is to have administration start to develop the options that we can consider at a later time when decisions must be made. And there's, I think, no advantage to delaying the work. The decision will come in due time, but we might as well start the work now. And that is the essence of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I agree wholeheartedly with that motion. Any debate or comments on the motion? Councillor Butler?
Thanks very much. And I agree with the motion. I'm in support. The only comment I wanted to add is, given that council is, and I'm summarizing what Mr. Given earlier said, council is in favor of considering all options, but Mr. Given has noted some concern around some of them. So I would encourage administration to come back with, let's say, conceptual ideas. I would hate to see administration put a lot of time into sketching out details of ideas that may not make it past, you know, first muster. And I fully expect that that's what administration would want to do, and I want to enable that. So they needn't feel that they would suffer from the criticism of coming back with something that is as yet, you know, perhaps still vague and perhaps still not really fleshed out. I think that's what we need. Don't put a ton of time into detailing suggestions until you have a stronger sense of where council might choose to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Councillor Butler. I agree. Is there any other comments or debate on the motion? And does administration have the wording of the motion as it read? I'm going to take that as a yes. If Ms. Byrne isn't writing that she needs that motion more clearly written, great. Thank you, Ms. Byrne. I will call the question if we're ready for it. All in favor? And there are none opposed. Thank you very much to administration and to Mayor Ireland for presenting the motion. It is 11:04. Let's take recess until 10 minutes after 11, giving us 6 minutes for a comfort break, and we'll resume at 11:10. Thank you. And have this next agenda item number 9.4 introduced by administration, as it has been before us for quite some time. And I don't believe that Mayor Ireland will be missing anything from his absence. Mr. Given, would you like to take us through?
I will just provide the brief introduction and Mr. Don will take council through. This is a further revision to the council code of conduct bylaw, incorporating some of the recommended changes that council provided last time. Maybe I'll turn it over to Ms. Nadon to highlight what those changes are. I believe we may be at a point where committee may be comfortable in either providing additional edits or recommending that this go forward to council, but I'll pass it on to Ms. Nadon to highlight any changes that she's brought forward from the last time you've seen this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Welcome, Ms. Nadon. It's nice to see you on your camera.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yeah, so as Mr. Given outlined, we've included the edits in the bylaw as we've been working on for the last few committee of the whole now. And essentially, there are changes in wording that were discussed last time. I think the changes to sort of the spirit and intent that were discussed to bring in some of the edits that were included in the previous version of the Code of Conduct are inserted under item 4. We have added a definition around closed meetings to match the information that's in the FOIP Act and adjusted wording accordingly. And really, they were all just small adjustments to try to make this version a bit more palatable to council. And as outlined in the report, I think the discussion around the investigator and how that process would work is really the crux of the issue, or if there is something to resolve today or to change what is presented in the bylaw currently, this would be the appropriate time to have those discussions and make any further changes. This item about the investigator was what prompted us to return to committee of the whole and not regular meeting, as we felt from the discussions last time that there was still a bit of discussion to be had around that. And yeah, I'm happy to explain any of the changes that are presented here or answer any questions, but I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nadon. Is there any comments or questions from council? Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. There's just a couple of missed grammatical edits in the final whereas, in the word receptive and the word speak. It should be receptiveness probably, and speaking, just to be in keeping with the tense of the other verbs. And then I had one issue around that question of the investigator. I'm quite happy with the wording that we have developed here. I'm only looking at 15.1b, where all complaints shall be addressed to the investigator. Maybe it doesn't matter, but I think we've agreed that the investigator might just be counsel, that there isn't necessarily an investigator with every complaint, that it's one of counsel's duties would be to determine whether there should be an investigator. So I wonder if that should simply read all complaints should be addressed and delivered to the CAO. And then it places, I think appropriately, the onus on the CAO to then proceed accordingly. It's a small matter. I'm not overly concerned about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Butler. Is there any discussion around that point raised by Councillor Butler? Ms. Nadon?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I just wanted to thank Councillor Butler for that clarification on the whereas, because I did have a note from the previous committee meeting, but it did not make sense to me when I was making those edits. So thanks for that clarification. I've made the adjustment on the tense and the verbs. So appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Nadon. Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any further adjustments, Mayor Ireland?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I hesitate. Nevertheless, I feel a need. On the definition section under investigator, should we determine how it is that council will either assign an individual or establish a body. It would be a simple thing to put in the definition, but it seems to me the investigator means council or the individual assigned or body established by council by, is it going to be by motion? I assume it's not going to be by another bylaw, but a little clarity might help. I see Mr. Given had a response.
Mr. Given?
Yes, thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath for Mayor Ireland. Appreciate that, Mayor Ireland. And what we may be facing here is if council is supportive of the bylaw generally, or specifically, I should say, supportive of the bylaw, then what we may need is to have either a council policy on the investigator or administrative procedures related to it. So, you know, so there may be a difference that we could see here between the bylaw itself, a council policy on investigations, and administrative procedures related to that. But I think we could, if council is interested in having more definition around how you might decide whether it's council or an outside party, and if it was an outside party, how you would define that it should be an outside party and who that outside party might be. That's something that we could do subsequent to council passing this bylaw. Administration could bring forward recommendations, essentially in the form of administrative procedure that, you know, probably preferable that it starts with a council policy so that council can have direct involvement in crafting the steps that you would like to do. And then there would be an administrative procedure that would support those steps. But again, I think that this is the, we can't hope to include all nuance in the bylaw. If there are some procedures that may change from time to time, maybe we want to have them outside of the bylaw so that the bylaw stands and its principles stand. And then we can separately discuss the processes that would happen outside of the bylaw. Because there is some additional definition needed, Mayor Ireland, you're right. When we say that there's an investigator and it could be somebody other than council, well, how do you decide? It is not clear in the bylaw that is 100% true. Maybe the how do you decide is actually a council policy.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. You may continue, Mayor Ireland.
The only other matter, thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath, is 10.4. And I raised this last time, but perhaps inadequately. My concern is simply this, that it is currently and should continue to be the responsibility of a member to figure out whether or not that member may be in conflict. But I don't think it's at least the financial responsibility of any member to question whether someone else is in conflict. And so I think, and maybe it's too much inside baseball, but I think that that particular section should say that it is the individual responsibility of each member to seek independent legal advice at the member's sole expense with respect to any situation which may result in that member being in pecuniary or other conflict of interest. So there can be no suggestion that it is on the wallet of a counselor that they have to pay for independent legal advice if they think one other member is in conflict. That cannot be the case. But again, it seems perhaps minor, but I think it is worth noting that we're responsible for ourselves, but we all have an obligation to the proper execution of our role as a unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Ms. Nedon, did you catch the wording requested by Mayor Ireland there, or do you need anything recited?
Yeah, what I have noted would be on the last part of 10.4 with respect to any situation which may result in that member being in a pecuniary or other conflict of interest. Does that capture it? And I did consider that during the last round of edits, and there were items that were raised from council, but that weren't necessarily clearly discussed or directed. So I did make a few executive decisions around my changes that are presented here today. And I guess the only other aspect I would like to bring by changing this this clause would be that, does it then mean that if someone is suspecting might be the wrong word, but suggesting that someone else is in a conflict of interest, and if they wanted to get legal advice on that basis, then where does that fall, right? So it's, I mean, it's a bit of a technical item, but if council is supportive of the change here, I'm happy to include it.
Thank you, Ms. Nardon. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Mayor Ireland, for bringing that up. It's, you know, the way you suggest it should read is the way I read it, and it's a really important point because it's explicit within legislation that it is up to an individual member of council to determine whether that member finds him or herself to be in conflict. Others may offer a suggestion that a councillor may be in conflict, but the decision as to whether the councillor should remove themselves because of being in conflict is at the discretion of the individual. And that's a pretty important point, and the change that you've suggested, Mayor Ireland, underlines that and I think aligns it with legislation. So it is important. It's not what did you call it, inside ball. I think it's an important change to make, and I'm glad you picked it up.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I agree. I did go through that in this term, and it was a really important piece of me doing my own diligence and seeking legal advice for a pecuniary interest. So I fully agree. Is there any other recommended edits, alterations to the bylaw as it's presented from administration? Councillor Demota.
Well, do we have enough detail in there on that pecuniary interest matter, or does it need to be there? Or is it more of a procedural thing where someone, if they remove themselves from the conversation because of a conflict of interest, are they then technically removed from any further discussion on the topic down the road? And where does that limit lie? Is that necessary here or in another area?
I think that that's really clearly defined in the MGA already. So I don't, from my personal belief, I don't believe that we need to include that in this bylaw.
Fair enough.
All right, does administration have everything that they need thus far with this perusal of the bylaw from today's meeting?
I believe we do. I heard Ms. Nadon say that she was able to capture the mayor's suggestion and the others that are mentioned today. I think what we'd be looking for, if council is comfortable that with those small amendments, this would be ready to go forward for final council approval. We'd be looking for a motion from committee to recommend that council approve the draft code of conduct bylaw as amended at our next regular council meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Is there a councillor prepared to make that motion? And in addition, should the motion also include to have a policy or administrative procedure attachment with respect to the investigator piece as discussed in today's meeting?
Deputy Mayor McGrath, my suggestion would be that administration would do that subsequent the passing of the bylaw. We certainly wouldn't be in a position to have a recommendation for you next week. So if council chooses to pass the bylaw next week, then that would be an appropriate time to give us some direction to come up with an appropriate policy or administrative procedure related to this. And then we would go through the cycle again of coming to committee and making sure that we've got it right with you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Do I have a councillor prepared to make a motion? Mayor Ireland.
Do I need to restate the motion?
I think it's clear in our agenda package.
Yes, that is the motion I'm prepared to make.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. Any debate on the motion? I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland, for presenting the motion. Thank you to administration for all of their work in the past couple months on the Code of Conduct bylaw. And thank you to Mr. Given for noticing that, in fact, our Code of Conduct bylaw was not up to where it needed to be in the standards for municipalities, for bringing it forward to us. Moving on to agenda item number 9.5, the review of the draft management plan for Jasper National Park.
Sure. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. A very brief report today, just to flag something to Council's attention that I know all of you are aware of. Parks Canada is currently in the process of their second phase of public engagement on the Jasper National Park management plan. This is a once a decade process that Parks engages in and has a significant impact, not just on the operation of the park outside the town site, but also specifically identifies policies and objectives related to the future development of the town site. Recognizing that and recognizing that this is again once a decade opportunity, it's administration's recommendation that council should form a formal opinion to provide to Parks as an input into that process as a part of their second round of public engagement. The submissions will be accepted until July 7th. So administration is bringing this to you today to request your direction on how we might provide input into that process. Administration can assist council by reviewing the plan and the points that are relevant specifically to the town site, municipal operations, and the community, and checking that against the themes and objectives contained in council's strategic priorities, and then providing some suggested input for your consideration. And then if council is supportive of that input, or if you have any additional, then you could formalize that through a motion. So basically what we're saying is administration can assist by doing some legwork, presenting that legwork to council at a future committee meeting for council to decide if they wish to make that their formal input into the process. And we can do that before the July 7th deadline if we get started on that work today. And so the recommendation is the council direct administration review the draft management plan and present suggested revisions at a future council committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Given. Any comments or questions from councillors? Councillor Butler.
I'd just like to thank administration for the proactive action of bringing this forward. I agree entirely with the recommendation and would be happy to hear administration's view on a framework for a future council position on the management plan. So I'm certainly in favor of the motion and be happy to make the motion as well.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any other discussion, questions, comments? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Excuse me, I'm just trying to scroll through that long document that was included with our agenda package. I fully support the recommendation, but in order to assist council and administration in preparing a response, which I think is required by early July, I wonder whether we might at this juncture also direct administration to see whether it can get from Parks Canada a list of the hierarchy of documents that pertain to our situation as a community within a national park. When I look specifically at the draft management plan and the management area of the community, it is difficult, I think, to really understand what document takes precedence. So it says in the draft management plan that development must be consistent with both the approved community plan and this document. So it becomes a chicken and egg situation, which does the new management plan have to be consistent with the existing community plan? And if so, when is the opportunity to change the existing community plan? Similarly, in objective 1.3, they talk about existing limits to development. And as I read it, the management plan has to be consistent with existing limits, which means, it seems to me, a perpetuation of the development cap. So at what point could we ever, within the context of an approved management plan, get to a point where we can legitimately discuss the development cap in this community? So that hierarchy of documents is critical, and I appreciate that Parks is under the same stress as us and try to necessarily sort that out. But as a starting point for our review of this document and our response, I think it would be helpful if Parks Canada can give us that list of hierarchical documents so we can then, particularly on those development issues, take a look at where our discussion has to be focused first and where it comes later. So all I'm suggesting is that perhaps in the recommendation, we include a direction that administration seek clarity from Parks Canada regarding the hierarchy of documents that govern community development in particular.
Thank you for that, Mayor Ireland. Anything to add? Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad that the mayor brought that up, these documents, because when I read through them, I've not been involved that much with these people, these process and the plan in the past. I have, but not since they've introduced a lot of these documents that pertain to the town. And I was a bit confused, and I'm glad that the mayor brought that up. I'm not sure how to sort through all of them because they do refer to the cap and number of square feet and so on and so forth. And I think we should find a way to have that removed. But thanks, Mr. Mayor, for bringing that up, because it was a concern or a question or something that needed clarification by me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Any further questions or comments for administration before a motion is presented? Hearing none, would there be a councillor prepared to both make the motion that has been suggested in our agenda package, as well as the additional recommendation that Mayor Ireland had added? Mayor Ireland?
I am happy to make that motion with the addition of my other comments.
Perfect. Does administration, particularly Ms. Byrne, have the wording of the second part of the motion clearly stated, or would you like? Perfect. Kayla has the information she needs. And is there any debate on the question? Hearing none, I will call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. Thank you to administration for bringing this forward proactively so that we do have the time to wade through anything that is pertinent to the community of Jasper. Moving to agenda item number 9.6, council remuneration. Mr. Given.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. So as council is likely aware, Council Policy B004 outlines council remuneration. That policy and the associated administrative procedure lay out a process for regular review that happens once every 4 years preceding a municipal election. This is in order to ensure that that members of council are fairly compensated in relation to comparable Alberta communities, and that prospective candidates have a fair assessment of what level of compensation and benefits they would receive if they're elected to office. Obviously, very important as people are making their decisions around whether or not they choose to run for council in the October election. The independent review that is contemplated in the administrative procedure could take a number of different forms. It could be done through an external consultant. It could be done through a panel of citizens. It could be to engage in a single community member. Administration is recommending, giving the short window for people to be making their decisions whether or not they're going to run for council, and people liking to know these kind of details before they make their decision. And given costs associated with some of the other approaches like hiring an external consultant, administration is recommending that we can, on council's behalf, provide an independent review of council salaries through access to data from other Alberta communities, and provide a report back to committee with recommended changes, if there are any, by June 8th of this year, which should provide enough clarity to the community and people who might be wishing to consider running for council to allow them to make their own decisions about whether they wish to move forward or not. So essentially this report is seeking committee's direction to administration to conduct the independent review of council salaries and present it back to you for ultimately for your approval. If council wish to undertake any of the other alternatives, obviously that would impact the timeline. Engaging a consultant would have some time associated with that and cost. Striking a panel of citizens would require identifying citizens, setting a terms of reference, allowing the citizens to meet and define their work that they wish to do, and then coming back to council with recommendations. So it can be, as council probably knows, that kind of investigation can be a bit of a process. But I think the principle of having an outside party who is not council review council salaries and make a recommendation to council provides the objectiveness and level of transparency and detachment that I think all council members would want to demonstrate to the public. And we believe that that can be handled with administration doing that work on your behalf, presenting all of the data in public forum to council and to the community, and then council making decisions based on that. And so that's why you have the report in front of you. The report also contains information about the current rate of pay for the positions of mayor and councillor, as well as the per diem amounts. We just note that per diem amounts have been relatively low through 2020 as a reflection of the fact that there are much fewer out of community in-person meetings taking place. But with that, Deputy Mayor McGrath, that's the very brief report. Again, we're looking to kickstart a process that will provide the information that the community and prospective candidates need in a timely manner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Questions, comments from councillors? Councillor Demota.
Well, 4 years ago, we had quite a bit of discussion on this, and and having the benefit of Richard as our mayor for a lot of things that we were able to have efficiencies with, but also recognizing that Mayor Ireland won't be the mayor for forever, although we love having him here. So we decided to take a path on finding out a justifiable pay for a mayor representing the community of Jasper, and if that position itself was being compensated accordingly. So we went and got an outside opinion on it, and thus we recruited, I believe, through a request for proposal process. We went with Mr. Kreiner, who created a report for us and established through his research what a compensation for a mayor of Jasper would look like, and consequently measured what council remuneration was to other in comparison to other municipalities. So there's some detailed information in that report, and I'm not sure if that could be used now or revisit that with him, or if we have to go back out to another RFP process. But there was a lot of information there, and the justification through the process, and through quite a bit of work that's been done recently with the HR committee. We've made some suggestions to the effect that I believe that we felt that council is being compensated fairly in comparison to other communities, but you know, if there's a need to go and justify that properly and to keep us in line and on side, then that's definitely what we have to do. But I believe there's already a lot of information that's already and work that's already been put into it. And I don't think that the process needs to be as long as what we might think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Given, for your presentation. I suppose a question that some in the community may have is whether a review by administration is independent enough. In my particular view, for reasons that Councillor Demota touched on to some extent, in this particular case, I think it is. In this case, the reasons are that extensive, fully external and fully independent review was done 4 years ago. And when you combine that with the Human Resources Committee recommendation that we continue with the same levels for mayor and council salary levels, adjusted only essentially by cost of living, I think that the review that administration is proposing is adequately independent for our purposes. And I know that there's very good information out there. AUMA, I think, provides some assistance with some numbers. So there's good information out there to review. And so administration is not going to have, be really creative in this. They're not going to have to go out there and drum up data. It's out there. So I'm in favor of the recommendation and find it appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. Any other comments from council? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Through you to Mr. Given, and I presume that we can probably fairly read between the lines, that you would be comfortable suggesting that in this case, administration is independent of council. And for all the reasons stated, I am drawn to that particular treatment of the issue. It's clean and it's quick, and it's I think in the circumstances the practical way to go. But I don't want to leave this discussion with any sense of hesitancy on your part, and the requirement of a review by an independent party is not part of the policy. It is part of the administrative procedures. And this takes us back to the last discussion we had about the code of conduct and the importance of words. So are you comfortable that independent party means independent of council rather than independent of administration, particularly since these are administrative procedures? If you have that level of comfort, I will tell you that I am perfectly happy to vote in favor of the recommendation. It makes sense, but I don't want administration to feel at all that they are in any sense positioned by this.
Well, first, Mayor Island, I'll say that this is a recommendation coming from administration. So you're 100% correct in your reading in between the lines. We are comfortable and confident that we're in a position to provide council an independent assessment. And I will say that we will present the full data to council to justify and demonstrate what our ultimate recommendation is, recognizing that there is not a desire for increases. That's clear that that's really not tenable in the community or desired by council. But if there was a vast disparity between Jasper and other similar communities, we would demonstrate that to council for your consideration about whether or not that might, and there would be a reasonable discussion about whether that might be an impact on people's ability to run or their desire to run. That would all be for at the council table. Administration's approach and the reason that we're confident in our ability to be independent is that it would be factual and data-based that we would present to you for your consideration. It is fair to say that in the future, as we go through the policy review process that is already on the books, that when we get to this policy, there may be different ways of doing it in the future. I have been a part of a process where the policy has more of the definition in it than the administrative procedure, because council defines by policy what they see as independent and defines by policy perhaps some of the timelines. Even now, in May, there are people, there's at least, there are people who are making or have made their decision about whether they're going to run for council or not. And this new information isn't in front of them. In the future, council's policy may be that this needs to be done by a certain date to allow for decision making. But again, that's something that we would do as we go through that policy review process that council has already initiated. And at this time, administration is confident that we can deliver that independent review that's required in the administrative procedure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Councillor Demota.
Well, from experience, I really appreciate those suggestions. And in the past, we weren't in those predicaments because of the timeline that was set for the campaign season, so to speak. And because that timeline's moved up, I think that those approaches are necessary. And I've never been a fan of saying how much councillors should get paid or have any, direct work in that. And I'm sure that's why those provisions were in the administrative procedures to have independent studies. And if it's clear that administration is independent of council, I'm very comfortable with moving forward with the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Demota. Anything further from other councillors? I too am happy with the recommendation that's been presented by administration that they do a review of the council salaries and compare it to other municipalities and report back to a future meeting. I think that that's a reasonable way to move forward, as all of the reasons have already been discussed. Is there a councillor willing to make the motion that committee direct administration to conduct an independent review of council salaries in comparable municipalities and report back to committee and recommend changes, if any, by June 8th, 2021? Councillor Journeau, thank you for the motion. Any debate, comments, questions? Hearing nothing, I will call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Councillor Journeau, for the motion. Thank you to Mr. Given and your entire team for the work that has been done thus far. Thank you to the HR committee, as I know that you have had this before you for the past couple months as well. There's no other new business listed on the agenda. Is there any other new business to be mentioned? Hearing none, I am curious if there is an appetite for council to have administration present options of pedestrianization for Patricia Street. It's a seed that's been planted. It's been discussed very, very casually in previous meetings. I believe that last year we could have missed an opportunity in the community of Jasper. And I'm curious to see if council has a shared appetite in seeing any recommendations come forward at future committee of the whole meetings by administration to have some discussion and some contemplation on what Patricia Street pedestrianization could look like, perhaps for the summer, the season, maybe 1 or 2 evenings a week, and see if there is any consensus to have this on a future agenda for discussion. How do councillors feel about that subject? Mayor Ireland?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. It is a topic of conversation in the community already. I think that inevitably it will land on our table. I have no hesitation to set the matter down for public discussion at a future meeting. It might be a short discussion. It might be very lengthy. I agree that there was an opportunity last year forced upon us. It is forced upon us again this year. It might be different than the norm, but it does present an opportunity. So if the discussion comes forward, I will welcome it.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Mr. Given, then Councillor Journeau.
Yeah, Councillor McGrath, appreciating that Council's considering the question that you raised. I can say that an early look at the recommendations from the Economic Recovery Task Force suggest a special focus on the downtown core. They have not finalized those recommendations, but I do know that themes around the downtown core are something that feature quite high in the considerations for the future recovery and resiliency of Jasper. And so Council may have an opportunity to discuss this in context of those recommendations when they come forward in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. That's really great to hear. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I am not opposed to this, but I think it's just a little early right now. We have lots of developments that are occurring. We have the sidewalk seating, taking out a lot of parking. We have paid parking coming up. I think that when we should wait for the end result, let's say, and what our permanent long-term plans are going to be for sidewalk seating. Looks like it'll stay with us, but the impact that it'll have, I'm not opposed to it. I just think it's a little early. But I encourage you, Deputy Mayor McGrath, to continue with it. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Journeau. And Councillor Butler, you had your hand raised, I believe.
I also am not opposed to having a conversation about it. I would prefer that it be, since we just heard that there may be some reference to this or connected issues coming from the task force, then let's at least see that before we put it on the agenda. I certainly wouldn't be comfortable with the suggestion of directing administration to take any action here today, not without it having been placed on the agenda and time for councillors to consider views. So happy enough to see it come up for conversation. As Mayor Ireland pointed out, it's already a conversation in the community, but I wouldn't support directing administration in any way here today.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I'm really pleased to hear from Mr. Given that this could be an item of conversation that will be seen come forward from the Economic Task Force. I know that with Whistler's Campground opening this season, there is the possibility of having 800 more people in Jasper and wandering around the downtown core. So I believe it is timely and in proper manner for in the next couple of weeks to see at least a conversation of possible options to consider for our downtown. Is there any other new business? We'll move on to agenda item number 10, correspondence, and we have no correspondence on today's agenda. The motion action list is agenda item number 11. And I believe our proper practice is to have a motion to receive or review the motion action list, Mr. Given.
Yes, Deputy Mayor McGrath, there are some updates to the list, so we'd be looking for motion from council to approve amendments to the list as presented. Those amendments would be the deletion of the May 11th item called COVID Relief Program. That has, of course, been delivered on its target date, as has the municipal utility expenses, which was also targeted for today, and the community garden expansion request. Those can all be removed, and just for council's confidence, they will be replaced by motions that were arising from today's meeting. But Again, the purpose here is for council to acknowledge by motion. Administration said that we were going to deliver something on May 11th. We did deliver those things. Council acknowledges that by deleting them from the list, and administration will process the other updates to the list with the actions arising from today's meeting that you would see at our, and you would see the list updated at the next council committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Is there a councillor prepared after reviewing the motion action list and its updates to make a motion to approve the updated motion action list? Councillor Keller-MP, is there any questions, comments, or debate? All in favor? Thank you very much, Councillor Keller-MP, for the motion. Thank you very much, Mr. Given, for keeping us organized with that motion action list. It's certainly very helpful. Agenda item number 12, council representation on various boards and upcoming meetings. Are there any reports? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Perhaps I was quick with my hand. It's not so much a report, but an upcoming meeting. A year ago, May 4th last year, regional mayors held a webinar focused on our business sector in each community. We have agreed to do that again this year. This year's webinar will be held on May 13th, starting at 8:30 in the morning. So an early rise for everyone to be prepared for that. Again, it's focused on the survival and sustainability of our local businesses. It's an opportunity to share some ideas, but also to engage with our own business sector. The event is free, but registration is required. There is a cap of 100 participants on the Zoom link. So just for the public and for other councillors who are interested, there is a link on our website and I believe on our Facebook page, so people can register if they're interested. Last year we were close to that 100 person cutoff mark, so I would encourage those who are interested to go online and get registered. It's intended to be a 2-hour webinar session, and again that will be Thursday morning at 8:30 with details on our website. And just for clarity, the regional mayors, Jasper, Hinton, Edson, and Yellowhead County are all involved in that, and it is hosted by Community Futures, and Nancy Robbins will be the facilitator.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. Any other councillor reports? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I will be chairing a meeting of Evergreen Foundation on Thursday. It is a meeting dedicated primarily towards strategic planning. We will be looking at our capital plan in particular, which involves decisions around future prospects for building more seniors housing in the region. This will be the last strategic planning session before the end of this council term. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. If there's no other councillor reports, I'll report that I was in attendance at the community conversation last week that was the adult life stage. And I think it's important for council to be aware of the desire for some advocacy to the province for rent controls. It's coming up in community conversations, and specifically last week on the rent increases that are happening in our community by some of the major property owners that are affecting the residents of Jasper, and some of those residents of Jasper work for our organization as well. And I think it's an important topic of interest and something to just consider as council, perhaps a seed being planted on how council feels about advocacy for rent controls, because it is affecting our residents. I will also be in attendance at the community conversation tomorrow, and I will be at a library meeting tomorrow. If there's nothing further for agenda item number 12, we'll move to upcoming events. We can add to our upcoming events the session with the regional mayors, as Mayor Ireland mentioned, that is on May 13th at 8:30 a.m. As Mayor Ireland discussed, the link is on our website and social media, as well as on June 3rd, the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce has a general meeting at 1 p.m. on Zoom. Are there any other events that councillors are aware of that we should bring to the attention of our agenda? Hearing nothing, we can move to agenda item number 14, which is a in-camera under FOIP of section 17. Just for the public's knowledge, once we come out of camera, after this item in camera, there will be no other business conducted. So there will be no reason to tune in later for any other business in the regular count or in this committee of the whole meeting. And may I have a motion from a councillor to move in camera? Thank you, Councillor Demota. The motion is to move in camera at 12:02 p.m. All in favor? Mr. Given?
I was just going to say, Deputy Mayor McGrath, that I will shortly send out a link to a new in-camera link, so you can watch for an email from me with a link to the in-camera session.
I've already done that. I was trying to chime in to let you know that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. And we've moved into camera, and I was trying to interject there. I was trying to do a point of order. We don't have a time that we're going to come back and meet in camera. So I think that we need a break here, and then I don't know where we would have that opportunity to suggest that. So that should be done here.
Yep. How does 12:30 sound to council to come back after 30 minutes of nourishing yourselves? Perfect. So we will reconvene our in-camera session at 12:30. For the interest of the public watching, we thank you very much for your attendance. We thank administration for all of their work in today's agenda. And thank you, council, for all of your input and perspectives being shared. We will reconvene in camera at 12:30 p.m. Thank you and have a great day.